we hit record or something like that, and we are back, and we're talking about our next episode. And I think we're going to go with it. We'll just do documentation, wild, wild west or something like that. We'll just sort of see where we go with that because I think there's a there's a lot of places we can take it, and there's a lot of places we need to take it. So we'll see how this one goes, and just sort of make that our primary topic. I think this episode around. Well, hello and welcome back. We are continuing our season on the developer journey. We are here at Developreneur, building better developers, the developer journey to becoming a better developer. My name is Rob Broadhead. I'm one of the founders of Developreneur. I'm also founder of RB Consulting, where we help wrangle technology, basically take that sprawl, simplify it, automate it, integrate it, whatever we need to do to get you to that big nasty thing that you had, and now it's nice and sleek, and helps you get your job done faster. We're like the iPod of technology, something along those lines. On the other side is Michael, and I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Malash. I am one of the co-founders of Developreneur and founder of Envision QA, where we help small to mid-sized companies and clinicians and healthcare companies build software to meet their business needs, as well as help them identify if the current technology they're using is what really is beneficial for their business.
This episode, everybody's favorite topic as a developer, documentation. We're going to talk about that because everybody complains that they get something that wasn't documented, but also nobody likes to document things. And so now we know why nothing is. That's why we complain all the time, is because we don't do it. Nobody else does it. So, hey, this is how you become a better developer, is you do the things that nobody else wants to do. A documentation is like testing to me a little bit, is that it has always been left behind. It's one of those things like, it'd be great if we have it. We know we should have it. We know we should do it. We a lot of times know how we should do it. We just don't. We run out of time. But also, in a similar vein, is that the tools to help us document have come a long, 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 long way. So we really need to be more cognizant of that. At the very least, understand what your environment, language, whatever it is, what your tool provides in the way of documentation. For example, if you're writing APIs and you don't know what Swagger is or those types of tools, then you need to, like right now, just pause, Google it, look it up, Swagger with your API or however you build it, and they probably got 18,000 tutorials on how to set it up. Also, if you don't know how to use Postman and you're building APIs, pause, go learn how to use Postman. And actually, Postman will help you do documentation. So that's a side note there. There are so many tools out there to help you straighten stuff out. Now, there's going to be some things out there. There's static code analysis and things like that, tools that are very valuable that will point to things. They'll sort of like warn you here and there, and they're going to be helpful for writing better code. But more importantly, or as importantly, I would say, are tools that help you auto generate documentation stuff. The old, I think it was really the first one that was out there. If you go back to JavaDoc and the ability to just like throw it against a bunch of files, and it creates a nice little documentation website. There is the same thing for every language out there that I know of. I mean, maybe not for like COBOL or something, but there probably still is something out there that'll do it. And if not, go write it, because it's not that complicated to document things to a level that a tool like that can easily generate something that then makes it very, very useful for the next person that comes around. And by that, I'm talking about things like depending on how your code is set out, it's going to be things like classes and packages and signatures. So you're going to know, what does this return? What does it expect? What is the data types that this expects? How does this thing even work? What is it supposed to work? What's the expectations? What are the exceptions? What are some of the error codes? Those things, documenting those are critical. Those are the things that when somebody comes by 2 years from now and looking at your code, That's the stuff they need to know. It's like, what the heck is this? You got this thing called function ABC. I don't know what that means. Give me some comments. Don't make me go through thousands of line of code to try to figure this out. And then I miss a couple of side effects or something like that. Document it. Part of becoming a better developer is doing the things that documentation is a sanity check for. It's the kinds of things where if you're documenting your function and I need to document the inputs, the outputs, what are the side effects, what are the data types, what are the expectations, then you should know what your stuff does. For example, if there's 3 different types of errors, then you should have somewhere in your code that it's going to kick out a different error code for each of those types of errors. Don't make people find your source code and crawl through that and go searching for, message text or something like that and try to figure out where this error is coming from. Those kinds of things are going to be invaluable to the next developer, which could be somebody like you, but also they're going to help you do a better job now. It really is a yet another validation, yet another form of testing to make sure that what you're writing is correct and of high quality. Now, I'm going to sit back and document what I just said while Michael provides his own level of high quality stuff, because I know you've got your opinions on this as well. So I want to see what's your feedback and where am I right and where am I wrong?
So without going too far on my soapbox of user testing and stories, let me add to some of the things you said, because I think you left off a few things. You touched on most of the high points, but one of the things that you didn't mention are README files or Markdown files, files within the application that not just tell you how to test the application, what the application is supposed to do, but how you're supposed to set up the application in a test environment, in a deployment environment. How do you actually get this code from point A to point B so that the users can actually use it? We need to also think about that within our documentation. So documentation isn't just front end, it's pretty much all the way through. You have the front end, which is your user stories. What is the application supposed to do? What are the expectations? What are some of the accepted test criteria? What is the accepted test failures? There's some things within a version of code that might not be fully implemented yet. So certain test stories won't be ready to be tested, so that you'll expect those to fail. As you're going through and developing, you're going to be developing with that expectation in mind that, okay, these stories should work. This is what I'm coding to. And when you hand it off to the testers, they're going to look at it and say, okay, I'm expecting this have to work. Maybe this won't work. And then they'll give you feedback and tell you what happened in between. And then finally, when it hands off to the users, if you did it right, you'll have release notes or product documentation that goes out to the users. So when the code comes out for the first time or an update comes out, they can look at this and say, okay, how is this supposed to work? So they can read through and it should match what the application does. Also, if things change, they should be able to look at the release notes and say, okay, this changed. So if I go in here, that's why I'm seeing this new feature. Or why is this new button here? Or why did this button disappear? That should all be documented from the beginning to the end user. You leave that out, you're going to not set the expectation correctly for the end user, and you're going to get a lot of negative calls, emails, or feedback that things are not working the way they're supposed to work. So that is in addition to what you said. Now, on top of what you said, some of the things I like, and one of the things that, in addition to the tools you mentioned, we have things like Bugzilla. GitHub allows you to use a form of Markdown or ASCII docs to actually write notation documentation that can be quickly converted into nice, easy to read web pages. So you could actually publish that with your code. Some of the other things you can use are like Atlassian tools, which gives you Jira, Bitbucket, Confluence. So you can not just write wikis, but you can combine the wikis with the tickets, the tickets with the wikis. You can even take the Bitbucket, your commits, which can percolate all the way up to the tickets and all the way up to the wiki. So if you do it right, by the time you get to do a release or you publish your code, your document may be self-published for you. So all you have to do is include that with the release notes when you publish the code out the door. And finally, as you're going through this, going back to our last discussion, you want to include all the key players. So as you're working on the documentation, make sure that all the players involved have looked at, or at least are aware of, what changes are being done to the software, so that by the end, everyone is on the same page and you can do a sign-off meeting of go, no go if everything has been met, or if issues have come up, is it acceptable to let the code go out the door with changes to the documentation?
Now that is very key, is that you will have more than one type of audience for your documentation, and you will also have more than one type of documentation. So I initially was focused on the code, the developer, but you do have the end user. So you may have user, online help or a user manual or something like that. You will probably have, depending on what the application is, some sort of an administrator's guide. So if there's somebody that's administering the system, probably some sort of a build or deployment or install guide. One of the things that Michael hit on early on is that you want to have a way to, with your documentation, you want to be able to plop this on somebody's desk or in their computer in some way, and for them to be able to go figure out, how do I make this run? How do I build it? How do I deploy it? How do I launch it? What do I need? What's required? And one of the things that I've run into a lot when people haven't done that, is that there will be all of these little secondary scripts or cron jobs or things that are out there that are sometimes critical to the build, but they're not documented anywhere and they're not in the main repository. So check those things in. Keep that stuff together. If you've got some little one-off script that you used to migrate data from version 1 to version 2, and anybody else that's going down that route is going to need to do it, then make sure that is somewhere documented, whether you've got a documents or utilities or whatever kind of folder somewhere as part of that. Or if you have a second repository that is basically, here's all of our stuff, here's all of our artifacts for our application, for our solution. It is critical. I mean, those are the things that it feels like everybody can figure that out. I don't know how many times I've seen a node-based app of some sort, and they're just based on, just do a node run. No, there's all kinds of libraries that maybe are a part of that, and maybe your environment isn't quite like the other. So that would even be part of the testing, is take your documentation, take everything, pick it up, put it on a new environment. Go spin up a VM, do whatever you need to, but take that whole thing, put it on the environment, follow the steps, test the documentation. Does it run? Did you include all the usernames you need to and passwords you need to? And what are all of these all those configuration files that you probably have somewhere around there? Are those documented so people know what those values are? And even more so, what values don't even get used, because we do have that on a regular basis. And if you have something that's unused, comment it out or do something. I mean, ideally, take it out. But if you, for some reason, need it there, comment it out and say, this I only had set here for testing or for this special bug or something like that. Make sure that all of those little magical things that we do as we're developing to, set things up in a certain way or to address a very specific bug, things like that. Make sure we've got those documented along the way, because that is the stuff that will drive the next person batty if they don't have it, particularly the build. And I say this having, in the last 10 years, I've got at least a half dozen projects where it was given to me. The start was, No idea how to build this, no idea what all the pieces are. We sort of think this is the source code, but we don't even know if this is complete. We've got these other things over here that we think are valuable, but we don't really know. It could be tied to another project. That stuff shouldn't happen. I don't care who you are, I don't care where you're at in your career progression. You should have some notes, you should have something, even if it's a couple of emails that are just basically like, here's how this thing runs, so that the next person can at least have a starting point. I will kick it back over to you while I take a deep breath after that little vent.
So my final thought on that is regardless of where you're doing the documentation, try to make sure that you move as much of the documentation to the code level. Add README files, add comments to the code. If you're doing APIs, add Swagger. But if you put it all at the code level, especially if you're doing unit testing or integration testing in your code, your test should also self-document some of the user stories. So if you do all your comments correctly, at a push of a button, you should be able to generate those documents you need for the release documents, for the user documents, for the deploy documents. It's all at the code level. This way, as things change, it gets committed and you have version history of what's going on with your code. That's not to say using things like the wikis and that are bad, but at the end of the day, the code is essentially the law. The code is what is the truth. Everything else is secondary. So if you put it in your code, it should be your Bible. This should be what it is that your code does. So if you do it, have a wiki page, it can get stale. But if you do it all in a README file, you can still point the README file to potentially the Swagger page if you're running locally, QA, whatever. But you can still do it all in your code and then commit it. And it's all there. It's all at the ready. So the next person that comes in should be able to easily pick it up. It's great for training and it makes our lives easier as developers.
Yeah, I like to think of it as you could, if you've got your car and you've got a user's manual for your car, there's a big difference from that user manual sitting in your office somewhere on a desk versus sitting in like the glove compartment of the car. And that's often what happens. We have all these little extra things, sometimes big things that are external to our application, but are core requirements. And those things need to be documented somewhere. It's things like, hey, this only runs on Windows 3.0. Okay, somebody needs to make sure that it needs Windows 3.0. Those kinds of things should be there. Even if you don't include that entire environment include those notes, say these are the things you need to do to set up the environment for success. One things you can do to set up our environment for success is to give us feedback, is to send us emails at info@developreneur.com. Leave us comments out on YouTube or out wherever you get your podcast, or on Developreneur, on any of our articles, anywhere. We've got over 1,000 articles out there. Feel free to throw stuff out there. We will respond. If it's a spam, we obviously won't. We'll delete it and move on. But if it's something useful, and for you guys, I know it's going to be useful. So, reach out to us. Offer us any suggestions, comments, questions, all of that kind of stuff. That is what we look for, because that is what we use to help build future episodes and even seasons. The season is not done. We are chugging along, but we are not done yet with the developer journey. So we will come back next time and we will continue to do that. As always, go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time. All right. Bonus material.
So one addition, which I saved for the bonus, is, well, I talked about moving everything to the code level. The beauty of doing that, if you do it correctly, you can actually write a script that can scan your README files, that can scan your Markdown, that can scan your ASCII docs, and essentially build a user manual or deployment documentation for you from the code. So once you're done and you're at the end of the cycle, all you have to do is deploy your code, your build script, your continuous integration deployment, whatever, could call that script, build all the documentation, essentially self-publish when the code goes out the door. So you could build, hey, here's the sign-off document. This is everything that's going in this release. Are we cool with this? Everyone signs off on it. Cool. Push the button, goes forward. It then automatically builds the release notes and the user documents at the end of the day. So you can automate pretty much all of this, people. And if you do it right, it can even tie to your user stories. So if you create the user stories and your test cases correctly, if you add a new test story, that could apply to the final documentation of, hey, business, this is now everything that we cover within our application.
Yeah, it does help a lot from the closer you keep the documentation to code, I think this will be my little bonus. It's the better you're going to be. It's making sure that when you make code changes, you're updating documentation, particularly the documentation around the code. And if you've done things right, then that ends up percolating its way up. So it may be things like, and I've seen this many times where you've got a primary requirements document that everybody put together. But what you now have somewhere down the road is the requirements document plus you have release notes that have come out along the way that says, okay, we added this feature, we added this fix, we did this thing, we did that thing. If you can do those sorts of rituals basically when you do a deployment where it's like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to run through this. We build this, we test this, we verify this, we generate that, we stamp everything. It gives you that roadmap to say, where did you start from and how did you get here? And you can track every piece of it along the way, which makes it critical. Then that's like huge for the next person because they can say, hey, I can not only see what you have, but I can go back and see why you did it, because that very often is something that if you don't have good documentation and a history of it, those are kinds of things that can get lost. And then people are like, well, why is this doing it? Why did they go this path? Why did they take that route? And you right there, I know you right there, that we do that stuff. We have a path we're going to take to make a solution. We're like, this is how it's going to solve the problem. And you realize something doesn't work, that perfect solution doesn't work for either because the problem is just a little bit off or because there's some sort of an API version, which is one that's always good to know. It's like, hey, I was going to solve this, but Java 8 that I was working on would not allow this to happen. It had a bug. So when the next person comes back and they're now on Java 20, they can say, hey, this is why they didn't do it before. So maybe we can do that now. Those are some of the things that are going to be really helpful to the next person around. Parting thoughts from you?
Yeah. So in addition to that, that made me think of backend systems like APIs. So if you don't document your APIs correctly, you could have APIs that get deprecated or removed. And if you don't communicate that to the end users or other software entities that integrate with your software, you essentially break everything downstream. And that's going to make for a very unhappy user base. I mean, you don't want to be like the people we don't want to name from the news a few weeks ago, but essentially you could end up in a situation like that. So be careful, make sure you document, and make sure if there's a critical change that it does percolate to some type of documentation that goes out to the end user.
Yeah, and that's the stuff that's probably going to be the easiest to maintain because it's usually at a higher level. So you don't have all those details, but it really is amazing how many times I've walked into a project and be like, I would kill for a user manual because I don't know. I'm not able to sit down and maybe with the users enough. I'm not able to see what is this really supposed to do. And sometimes that doesn't translate even from sometimes a fairly good requirements document. If they don't have some good user stories and some things like that, it's evolved into something that is used different from where it was. And then it gets very difficult to understand like what's the why? What is the purpose for this thing? Because it got lost in translation somewhere along the way.
One final thought on that. Typically think of the golden rule. If you touch a piece of code, make sure you leave it in a better place than where it was when you touched it, and make sure that you leave the documentation to the whoever in a better place when you touch the code. Because you don't want to be the next person to come behind someone else who didn't do that, and then you're lost.
And that's honestly, that's like one of the biggest values that you can bring to your customer. When you get to that situation, your customer, your employer, the project is okay, it's gone off the rails. but finding ways to bring it back on the rails, finding ways to say, okay, this is what they had, this is what was done, this is how to do it better. Even if you can't fix all of it, if you can just make it better than it was when you started, that's at least progress in the right direction. That being said, I am going to progress to the right direction of moving on with my evening. And Michael, I think we'll do the same. So, as always, feel free to leave us feedback however you can. We'll be back here again. As always, come back next time around, same time you're used to. You will see us out there. We'll have a new episode, new podcast, new YouTube video to go with it. And we're just going to keep chugging along. And we've got plenty. I mean, we may come back and just rant about documentation again, but probably not. We've got so many other things to rant about. We'll move on to those in future episodes. You guys go out there and have a good one, and we will talk to you next time.